Game week has finally arrived here in the new and bigger Big Ten. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Bleav in Big Ten. I'm Rhett Lewis, and I'm fired up to be back here with you on Bally's, on SiriusXM, on YouTube, and everywhere that you guys interact with our content. We sure do appreciate it here. Man, we have 18 games to talk about. We're going to get to all of them here at some point, but we're going to start with the biggest and the last game to kick off. All right, saving the best for last as we get you set for USC LSU from Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas on Sunday. And to help us do that, host of Bleav in USC, Cooper Perkins is here with us. Coop, what's up, man? Welcome to the program. Excited. Welcome to the Big Ten. Let me first, as a Big Ten traditionalist, let me be the first to again welcome you. Glad to have you, buddy. Appreciate you being with us.
Hey, I appreciate it. And we could not be more excited to be in the Big Ten. I think this has been a long time coming. You know, the Pac-12 was a beautiful thing for many years,
Yes,
but, you know, at a certain point, things have to change. And I'm excited they're changing the way that they are. And how better to start the Big Ten with a marquee matchup to try and make a statement that we do, in fact, belong as part of the group.
Well, and to make a statement in the decades-long debate of Big Ten versus SEC, right? That we get the Big Ten SEC challenge, quote unquote, unofficially here to kick this thing off. And I can't wait for it here. Number 23 USC, number 13 LSU, program steeped in winning tradition. But for USC, you know, last year it was something that did not live up to expectation, although left the season on a high note in the Holiday Bowl with Miller Moss's epic performance. But what I love, you know, you on your most recent pod previewing this game over on Bleav in USC, you said, I'm expecting this to be chapter 1 in Lincoln Riley's attempt at a scorched earth revenge tour. Nothing will be held back. Take me inside that thought process here, Coop.
Yeah, you know, I don't think you have to listen very hard to hear the national narratives about Lincoln Riley and about USC. And for 8 months, they've been really harsh. And I think in many ways they've been warranted. You know, what has been the consistent talking point about Lincoln Riley? Well, his teams never play defense. And until they play defense, we cannot expect that of him. We can't expect him to field a championship team because they always will have good enough offense to get there. And the defense will always be bad enough to unravel it when it's most important. And, you know, until that's proven otherwise, that is still correct, you know, but I think what's been so interesting watching Lincoln Riley is just the massive change in both his tune, but more importantly, his behavior, right? It's one thing to say, we're going to change some things. We're going to change our philosophy. We're going to make defense a more important thing. And then it's an entirely different thing to fire everyone on a defensive staff and go and handpick people from around the country and develop an all-star staff. And I don't think this has gotten enough attention nationally, that what the defensive staff looks like at USC is the kind of stuff that you dream of in like a video game, right? You've got 4 former coordinators. You have a former head coach at North Dakota State, which, albeit not FBS, is still the premier FCS program, right? You have these guys with really high-level experience coaching, not just as position coaches with bright futures, but having done it. They've been DCs. They've been head coaches. And I think what's so interesting about Lincoln in this case is I think he's internalized so much of the criticism. I think he's heard it. I think he's sick of it. And I think he recognizes the mistake that he made in hanging on to Alex Grinch as long as he did and sees this season as a prove-it year, you know, and he's not on any kind of hot seat at USC. They can't afford to put him on a hot seat. And anyone who suggests otherwise is either being disingenuous or doesn't understand the reality of the situation where they backed up the Brinks truck and he's going to be their coach as long as he wants to be their coach. But, you know, behind closed doors, the whispers have been that Lincoln will not stay if Lincoln doesn't think he can win at USC. And they backed him up with the necessary funding to go and find these coaches to put together the staff that he thought was necessary. And just watching that behavior, man, of going out and prioritizing that side of the ball to the extent that he has really leads me to believe that this legitimately is a different mentality this year. And what better way to start it than with a marquee matchup against a program that, you know, in many ways, like USC, is perennially overrated at the start of a season. You know, LSU's backed it up more regularly in recent years, but you know, you can count on them being top 15 at the worst every season, and that's a chance to make a statement. So I'm excited to see how it plays out, and we got plenty to talk about here. But that behavioral change, not just
Yeah.
the vocals, the behavioral change from Lincoln Riley really is something that hasn't gotten enough comment and isn't something that enough people are paying attention to nationally.
I think those are some great points you make right there. And by the way, we will get the counterpoints. Okay. We are nothing if not
Good,
fair and
good.
balanced over here at Bleav in Big Ten. We're going to welcome Blake Ruffino to the program to give the LSU perspective on this matchup as Brian Kelly looks to get that team into the college football playoff and make some noise there in the SEC this year. That's coming up here when we finish up on the USC side of things. But let's dig in here briefly on the defensive side of coaching staff changes. This has been well publicized. We've talked, you mentioned it all. D'Anton Lynn comes in to lead this defense from across town at UCLA, where he spent a year doing some good things with the UCLA Bruins defense. I first got to know D'Anton when he was nominated to be the head coach of one of the teams of the East-West Shrine Bowl during his NFL days, and really got to sit down in production meetings with him to understand how kind of, meticulously organized he is about the way that he wants things to work. And I think we saw that in the spring game, right? I mean, look, I don't know how many defensive coordinators can say they forced 5 turnovers on a Lincoln Riley offense, but that's what they did in the spring game. And say what you want about that kind of environment. That was pretty dang impressive because it was the culmination of what they had worked on for 14 practices, right? And I think that positive momentum carried throughout the summer. Into fall camp, we see a little bit less of them, right? So, I guess a little bit hard to say there, but I think you can see some individual players progression. And then I would just ask you, Cooper, where do you expect D'Anton Lynn's impact to show up with this USC defense in terms of tangible results?
This is going to sound so silly, but this is just how low the bar is. I expect to see a defense that consistently knows where it wants to be. And that's something we haven't been able to say the last 2 years at USC, as long as Lincoln Riley's been the head coach. You've seen a lot of disorganization. You've seen a lot of confusion. You've seen the ball getting snapped before players are set. And so first and foremost, just from a tangible viewer's perspective, the thing that I expect is to see organization and confidence in scheme. One thing that's interesting is, there are 2 philosophies when installing a new scheme and introducing a new coordinator. It's you can take your time with that install and be slow and make sure that everyone understands everything 100% at every point, or you can kind of put it all out there and try and, work through each item as they come up. And what USC chose to do and what Coach Lynn chose to do is be really slow and really, really meticulous in that install. So I'm expecting to see a group that knows how to line up, knows where to be at the very least, knows the fundamentals of the base defense, and whether or not that gets disguised into more creative looks down the stretch of the season, we'll see. But as far as statistics and what area I think will be the most visibly improved, it's the defensive backfield. I think part of that comes with D'Anton Lynn brings 2 of his guys with him from UCLA. So immediately you have 2 plug-and-play guys who are going to understand this defense at a very high level, who also performed in this defense at a very high level at UCLA. With that, there are also some handful of really talented players. And, I was having dinner with a buddy last night who I went to USC with, and he made this joke to me that, coaching in college football is everything. And either last year, USC's defensive coaching staff missed on every single recruit for 4 years, or the coaching was that bad.
Yeah.
And one of those 2 things sounds a lot likelier than the other, simply because even a blind squirrel finds a nut, right? You're going to find those stars on defense on accident sometimes. And they didn't have that at any place, in any position of those back 11. So I think you're going to see it in the defensive backfield. I think you're going to see those safeties and DBs. They really bolstered with the transfers. Achille Arnold, a kid from Southern California at Mission Viejo High School by way of Oregon State, is one of the best cover safeties in college football. Yeah. So I think it's going to be tough to throw the ball. Now, what that defensive line does, and if they have to be covering in the back end for 6, 7, 8 seconds, we all know that can become a pretty difficult prospect. But I'm expecting to see that defensive backfield be a lot tougher to throw against. And they're still going to give up yards because it's Lincoln Riley's offense, and they're going to be on the field, and he's going to put them in bad situations. But it's going to be visibly different. It's going to be visibly different, and it's going to look like a group that is much more confident and competent. I think you cannot underestimate just how valuable that confidence in the scheme is. And those 2 guys, coming in, John Humphreys and Kamari Ramsey coming in to kind of anchor the back end, I think is just massive.
Yeah, I think Kamari Ramsey could end up being an all Big Ten type of performer because of the versatile nature of his skill set, his familiarity with Danton Lynn's scheme, and Danton's want to make that dude an absolute playmaker, which he's shown the propensity to be at UCLA. And then obviously Bear Alexander will be a big piece of what happens here up front. I think everyone understands that impact. I'm also kind of curious your impression. When I watch practice, DeCarlos Nicholson at corner, length, and I thought he had a break on the football that was clear cut, best I've seen in person this summer watching a bunch of teams. Made a couple of plays on a ball on some talented receivers, right? On Deuce, on Zachariah and company. So, and with, Miller in at quarterback too. I mean, and he was thriving there. So I'd ask you about DeCarlos a little bit. And then, the guy that has always piqued my interest, Eric Gentry, right? 6'6", 215 pounds, little light to play linebacker, little bigger to play safety, kind of an in-betweener. But with Danton Lynn's creativity, I'm wondering how he might deploy him and get the most out of his skill set. Any thoughts on those two players in particular?
Well, to touch on DeCarlos first, I think what he brings to the table is that SEC body. The way high school recruiting works these days is by the geography of body types. And there are just certain kind of bodies that you really don't get a whole lot of out on the West Coast.
Yeah.
We get a couple a year, and most of the time, those guys end up in the SEC. Look at Dijon Lee right now, the top-ranked player in California, Mission Viejo High School, awesome cover corner, going to Alabama, right? So what DeCarlos brings is that body type. He brings that length that you talked about. He brings that quick step, breaking on the ball. And I think that's instincts more than it is, the physicality.
Yeah.
But I'm really fascinated to see how he fits. And for Eric Gentry, though, that's such a great question, because to me, he is the barometer on the defense's success. How they figure out to use him will tell me how good this defense is going to be, because Eric Gentry is a walking turnover machine. He is so long. He's so bizarrely shaped to be in the position on the field that he is, right? That it disrupts passing lanes in a way that quarterbacks aren't familiar with, right? He's 6'7" with almost a 7-foot wingspan. He reaches his arm out, and all of a sudden it's an entirely different set of passing lanes than it would be with your average size linebacker. And we saw that a little bit in year one under Lincoln Riley. Gentry got a lot more playing time. Alex Grinch visibly did not know how to use him, but at that point seemed to recognize that,
right,
this guy has some intangibles and this weird body that's so valuable because it just confuses and disrupts the normal patterns of offense. He eventually got hurt that season. The Utah game really was never the same. And then last year seemed to be struggling with that injury well into fall camp. And I think that set him behind. And next thing you know, that he wasn't playing. But how Danton Lynn uses him will tell us very quickly what this defense is going to be. Is this going to be a defense that is built purely on the fundamentals of a scheme and just trying to do the basics of be lined up and tackle? Or is it a defense that is going to do those things and then also be a little bit more creative and have the possibility of being disruptive? The bar at USC right now defensively is so incredibly low that truly, I was talking to Barrett Salee about this a couple months ago, and he made the point that until USC proves they can tackle, we can't take them seriously on defense. And that's true. But if USC can tackle and also can figure out how to deploy a guy like Eric Gentry, then there's the possibility that unit could be good, not just serviceable. And, that's a big difference. But, he's a guy that I'm thankful that you bring up, because the national media doesn't know what to say or do about him, because the coaches, frankly, haven't known what to say or do about him, right? He's just this big, long, he does not have a linebacker's body, but he does have linebacker instincts, and figuring out where he fits is a really difficult task. But I'm confident that this coaching staff, Matt Entz, his linebackers coach, is a creative guy in his own right. Yeah. He knows how to get a lot out of talent. And for Gentry, I think he's been really clear with the media in a way that players typically aren't, that I've just got a better ability to communicate with these guys. He doesn't feel like the black sheep that they don't know what to do with, so they don't want to talk to him, right? It's like the pretty girl at school that's got too much going on. You don't even know how to open the conversation, so you leave her alone. That's kind of an Eric Gentry at USC defensively. Like, he's got all these these options that you can deploy him at. He's got the length, he's got all that, and they just would rather not talk. So the fact that he's been pretty vocal about feeling like he's connected with these guys and feeling like there's an actual discourse is encouraging. So,
No doubt.
Eric Gentry very easily could be a name, I think, providing he stays healthy at the end of this season, that we look at as someone who snuck through all of the lists, snuck through the freaks lists, snuck through, the rising linebackers list. Like, he's a guy that when put in the right places is the ultimate disruptor.
Look at this. We're like double-digit minutes into this conversation. We haven't even talked offense yet. But that's where we're at, right, in this state of USC, because if the defense does improve, then we know the offense is going to score points. So the question is, Cooper, how? And what does this Miller Moss version of Lincoln Riley's explosive attack look like to you?
I think it's going to look like a system as opposed to what we've seen the last couple of years. And I'm as much of a Caleb Williams fan as anybody. I think he's a special player, and he gave us great memories and was so much fun to watch. But I think with Miller Moss, what you're going to get is, I hate to use this term because it's become a bit taboo in some way, but a game manager. He's a game manager that has one skill that I think is elite, and none of them are physical. And that skill is his ability to process information. I mean, he's a really smart kid. All of his background growing up reinforces that he's legitimately intelligent, not just football smart. And so I expect him to consistently make the right choices. And it's all going to hinge on what the offensive line looks like and how that run game supports him. But I'm really confident that this is going to be an offense that doesn't take any significant step backwards. It'll look different. It may not be as explosive at times. And I think those explosive plays are going to come as a function of scheme more often than they will personal genius and mastermind at the quarterback position. But, we've talked so much about defense for a reason, right? Lincoln Riley's lost one game when holding the opponent under 30 points. And
they score.
Again, that's such a low bar to clear. Hold them under 30 and we're going to win. And I'm confident this team's going to average well over 30, probably in that 36 to 40 point range. And the biggest question mark for me early in the season is what the wide receiving core looks like, and do they get separation? Yeah. Because at USC, you always have talented skill guys. You're always going to have guys that end up in the NFL playing wide receiver. And there are 4 guys that are NFL level talents that could eventually be playing on Sundays. But are they creating that separation? Because Miller Moss does not have, the gift of extending plays that Caleb Williams did.
Right.
If they're not separating on time, as the passing game is designed, then he's going to be in trouble back there. And that will be something that really we have to watch early on. Are guys like Zach Branch and Jacoby Lane and Deuce Robinson, are they creating that separation or are they not? And some of that will come down to opposition and what the quality of defensive backs looks like. And that'll change week by week. But offensively, I think we're going to see a system that looks a little bit more like Oklahoma with Baker Mayfield, but even that's not the perfect barometer for it because Miller's not as mobile as Baker was. The USC running back room is talented but thin, so I don't think they're going to be willing to use them in the same way that they use Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine and those guys at different points in time. So I think there's going to be a lot of creativity in the run game. It'll be the classic Mike Leach balance of ball distribution to different places on the field as opposed to run versus pass and kind of that more traditional perspective on balance. But I expect them to be a dangerous offense. I think they're going to be pass first. I think that's what Lincoln always wants to be the case. But I think that they have all the pieces in place to be a really potent group, and our questions will be answered very quickly. That's the beauty of college football season starting, right? We spend 8 months, 9 months talking about these possibilities and all these different factors at play. And then on Sunday, we're going to know very quickly what actually is true and what isn't true. And I think on the offensive line, there is a youth that finally grew up towards the end of the season that got to be on display in the Holiday Bowl. I think a year of conditioning and strength training is only going to help those guys. But like Elijah Page is a young tackle for that team that I think is going to become a national name far sooner than later. Jonah Monheim transitioning to center is one of those things where you actually think you have to hold your breath more than any other spot on the line because guys don't transition to center well. That is a coin flip. You can have a very talented lineman that comes back to try and boost his draft stock by playing center, and it ends up in the toilet. And we saw that at USC last year. And so I have my cautious optimism about that group, but holistically, I think we're looking at a group that's going to be really explosive, but in a very different way.
That's some nuance right there to this USC offense. Really covered it all through this. Cooper, I sure do appreciate it. Cooper Perkins with us here. Check him out on the Bleav in USC pod on the Bleav Network YouTube page. Some great content out there ahead of this fantastic Sunday matchup between USC and LSU. Thanks again, Coop. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Rhett. Appreciate you, man.
All right, still to come here. We'll get the other side of this matchup with Blake Ruffino as he gives us the LSU perspective on how Brian Kelly hopes to open this season with a win over the Trojans. That's next. Hey, what's up, friends? Welcome back here on Bleav in Big Ten. What a week. What a weekend. It shall be 18 Big Ten games on the docket in this first season of the newer, bigger, badder Big Ten. And we saved the best for last here on the docket this weekend. And that is because at Allegiant Stadium at 7:30 Eastern time, the 23rd ranked USC Trojans are going to try to go into Vegas and upset the 13th ranked LSU Tigers. We talked to Cooper Perkins from USC, Bleav in USC earlier in the program to get some insight there. Now time to get the flip side, go behind enemy lines, if you will. And welcome, Blake Ruffino, co-host of the Ruffino and Joe Show here on Bleav, founder of AYS Sports, and excited to chat with you, Blake. Welcome, man. Look, I'm Louisianan at heart here, so this one tugs at my heartstrings here a little bit on both sides of this thing, because I am a Big Ten traditionalist, but I'm excited to talk some Tiger football with you, man. Welcome.
As the great theologian Ed Orgeron once said, "Oh, that Tiger." I felt like when I came in here, there was going to be a thing of booze. You know, the Big Ten on Ruffino and Joe Show, they don't like me too much right now, so they're a little upset with me because I said, I think it's top heavy, and so I'm picking Ohio State and Oregon, and they're like, what about all the rest of us? And I'm like, I just like Ohio State, man. Like I gotta show love.
Well, I mean, look, you are clearly an unbiased member of the media, because the Big Ten clearly, takes the cake this year in the Big Ten SEC debate. I mean, two teams in the top three outside. I mean, look, we know Georgia's at the top right now. All right, subtle shade there, but you get the point. Look, it's different this year. It's bigger this year, and I think this matchup kind of represents that, Blake. SC and LSU, right? I mean, this is these are two traditional powers, right? And while USC fell on hard times a little bit last year, and LSU has had its fair share of kind of ups and downs, but has always stayed above the line. What does this game represent to you for Brian Kelly and LSU?
It's time to get back to what you were. Rhett, you know this as a former Louisianian, Louisiana ties yourself. What was LSU known for in the last 20 years? So I preface this by telling people all the time, LSU is second in national titles behind Alabama in the last 20 years, right? And so with that being said, what did they always do in week one, game one, whether it was Tyrann Mathieu going up against Oregon and putting on the stage, or Leonard Fournette going up against teams that he went up against? I mean, there were so many different great moments in game one, like, hey, man, LSU might not be able to learn how to throw the ball vertically under Les Miles or anything like that.
That's right.
But one thing that they're going to do is run the football and be really good defensively.
Yeah.
And look, the last game, Rhett, that I covered in person at the media was the last time LSU won a home opener. That was Joe Burrow. And I'll never forget this.
Oh, baby.
Burrow walks out the tunnel, and my big old fat rumpus are sitting right there. He goes, I'm about to put up 50. And I'm like, all right, I'm sold. We're winning, Natty. And so I think that you just got to be back to who you are. And I think both teams in and of themselves feel the same exact way going into this one. So, look, I think personally for both, it's a must win to start off a really good season. But I think if you're LSU, you got to come out here and assert some dominance after what's happening to you on primetime the last 2 years.
Yeah, and look, I love that. By the way, if you go to Blake's page on X, I mean the preview for this week with the picture and the caption is "Run the ball."
Run the ball, baby. Run that.
I love that. Yeah, man. I mean that's part of what this is all about. So tell me how they do that with this year's crew of running backs and how this thing looks up front for LSU.
Look, Rhett, I think what we've seen over the last 2 years with Jaden Daniels, is LSU can't run the football without Jaden Daniels. That is the biggest lie known to mankind. Like, it's like, did they get away from it sometimes because they had Jaden running the football right at you? Well, yeah, it's Jaden Daniels. I mean, like everybody trying to say, oh, they can't run the football. Every running back last year had over 5.5 yards per carry. And if they do that with this really good offensive line again, I think that that's how they're going to control games, Rhett. I think that this philosophy and style of Brian Kelly and Notre Dame, 12 personnel, we're going to line up, run the clock down, and we're going to run it right at you. It's here. Now, Brian Kelly graciously gave us 14 of the 21 days that they were out there, right? And so we got to be out there for the entire practice. And what did we learn? Well, there's a guy named Caleb Jackson at 230 pounds that's going to run right at your face. And if you're not ready, you're going to
have some trouble.
You're going to have some trouble. And I think because of how well that they've recruited along the offensive line is they can establish the running game. And Will Campbell, the All-American, talked about that last night. Like, in the big country 318 accent, he says, I'm just going to let you know we're going to run football. Good. Because here's the thing, too. You got away with last year, score. Sometimes you got to give your defense a breather. And look, I think, Rhett, something that people are talking about, but not really like leaning into. Those iPads on the sidelines for a defense when you're struggling can be
a big deal.
It's a big deal. Brent Key at Georgia Tech talked about that. He goes, man, we gave up the opening drive. Then we had an 8-minute drive of our own. Well, the reason we did things better defensively is we were able to fix things on the sidelines. And I'm like, just a light bulb went off for me. So I think that they want to assert their dominance, play a little keep away from USC, who was 117th in the country last year in time of possession, which feeds into what Brian Kelly ultimately wants to do this year, in my opinion.
Yeah, and look, I think that's an interesting, point of conflict in this matchup, because this is a USC team that was very much, we have to score. Like, Caleb Williams came onto the field every possession last year and was like, dang, we just let up another touchdown. I got to go score again, and now this defense is going to be different this year, Blake. And so that's kind of where I'm curious, like Danton Lynn comes in, Bear Alexander, big defensive tackle here. He'll be, priority one, I imagine, for LSU if they do try to run the football the way that you're talking about, which I do expect. And I'm really curious to see how this looks. Now, if you can provide some balance, I wonder how that really tests Danton Lynn's new defense here this year. They forced 5 turnovers on Lincoln Riley's offense in the spring game.
Yeah,
it's spring game. Say what you want about it, but not many defense coordinators can say that if they've gone up against Lincoln Riley. So I guess the question here, though, is, all right, run the ball. But when Garrett Nussmeier's back there to pass, what does this look like for LSU? Obviously, Kyron Lacey, tremendous talent, got, a ton of talent again on the in the receiver core and in the target zone, for Garrett. So what does that look like when they find some balance as they try to attack a new look, right, USC defense?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Rhett. D'Anton Lynn in that spring game sent 40 blitzes. So on Mondays, we go through our film breakdowns on our show.
Yeah.
And this dude's more exotic than Joe with the Tigers and whatever.
Let's go. Tiger King, baby.
Yeah. He's more exotic when it comes to blitzing than that. I think Garrett's got to get the ball out quick. These bootlegs, these waggles, these hitches. Look, you have 2 very big-bodied wide receivers. Rhett, people love to point out when I'm wrong on my show. And I think I might have been wrong on CJ Daniels, the transfer from Liberty, because I don't know if I want to see with my own eyes a guy coming in from the G5 who's supposed to be really good. When you come to this place, like, hey man, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., that's a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
Rhett, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you better watch out for him on 3rd down. And that's the thing that I look at with these big-bodied wide receivers with Kyron Lacey and C.J. Daniels. I don't know if they want to be as vertical as maybe Jaden Daniels was last year at times. I think they want to get 10 to 12, 10 to 12, 10 to 12. And that for me is when you're getting the ball out that quick, you're going to have to back that pressure out. You can't send that pressure in when you're getting quick completions. And I think that in and of itself, the style is something very interesting. However, Garrett has had a little bit of issues this fall camp when Blake Baker sent the heat and Harold Perkins is all over the place and what we've seen. look, he's not as mobile as Jaden Daniels. I don't think anybody is mobile as Jaden Daniels, but I think that you just look, he's got to make the smart throw. And guess what? Take the sack. Live to fight another down. And if that's the more of the balance, Rhett, that I'm looking at in reference to just get the ball out quick early and rely on your running game. If you get an 8, 9, 10-yard or 10-play drive, you're going to win this football game if you do that consistently. But just get it to those big body wide receivers. And, yeah, take your deep shots. Chris Hilton might be out the wide receiver. But just be methodical down and make them back that pressure out to make sure that you can sustain drives.
In your latest episode of Ruffino and Joe and on the YouTube page, you've got the do's and don'ts for LSU this week against USC. Yep. Outside of what we've talked about in terms of, hey, run the dang ball, I know that's on the do list. Is there another do and or don't that stands out to you in this matchup specifically?
I think the biggest thing that I prefaced this last night. There is a statistic. I'm not a very big statistical guy, Jughead, offensive lineman from Louisiana. I'm not necessarily always an analytical dude. But one thing that I told my audience or told the audience last night, this is something that I've been holding on to. Lincoln Riley has had issues at times when it comes to protecting his guy, the quarterback. Because when you look at last year, I understand that Caleb Williams was very innovative and he was an improviser and that could lead to sacks. I understand that. You were in the hundreds the last 2 years when it came to sacks allowed. And I think that Blake Baker in and of itself and the pressure that they want to put on with Perkins, Parashan, Savion Jones, Braden Swinson, and Deshaun Womack, I think that benefits LSU to some extent, especially at tackle. So that in and of itself, the biggest do. In my humble opinion, yes, Miller Moss is going to go off on you at times, and that's fine. What does he do when he starts getting hit and you start getting tackles for loss and sacks? LSU was second to last in the SEC in tackles for loss. I'm just going to tell you this right now. If they have a tackle for loss in this game, I'm going to cry. I'm legitimately going to start bawling, crying. I think you got to get after Miller Moss. I think this offensive line at USC, while good and talented and more than likely well above average, I think that they have had a propensity to giving up sacks on crucial third downs. Again, 98th and 100th last year, considering on whatever site you want to look at. Allowed last year. So that's my biggest dude. The biggest don't that I have is Garrett's just got to not turn the football over. I think everybody was, when they went 2 years ago to the SEC championship game and Jaden Daniels gets hurt with the ankle and Garrett comes out and throws for 300 yards in one half on the national champion. Everybody's like, who in the Rudy Poo is this kid? Like, yeah, you're right. This kid can really sling it. However, LSU was down 14 in that game with a chance to go down and get down to 7. It was 14 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter, and he threw a pick to Keisha when he was trying to throw the ball to Keisha Boutte.
Yeah,
you had 4 straight 3-and-outs on Georgia, and if you don't make that decision, you're down 7, and you've already had 4 stops on Georgia before they continue to run it all over you. Those are just the small things that get you beat. When you turn the ball over, that'll get you beat. And then, look, everybody has asked me, I've been on Redskin shows. I've been on NFL shows. Jaden Daniels. They were like, hey, what's Jaden Daniels' best attribute? And they were like, what about his legs? What about his arm? I'm like, he doesn't turn the football over. You want to know how LSU beat Bama? You want to know how LSU won the West in year 1 under Brian Kelly? Because they had 6 turnovers. That's why. Like, those are small things that in games like this on the road in Vegas that either make or break you getting beat.
Which, of course, brings the Danton Lynn piece of the conversation back into kind of full circle focus after that spring game performance. So that's some fantastic context for us ahead of this matchup here as we get set for USC and LSU. Blake, man, this has been so much fun. Be sure to tune in to Ruffino and Joe. Check them out on YouTube. Give them a subscribe wherever you get your podcasts available as well. Blake, thanks so much, man. This has been a lot of fun. Might have to recap this thing once it all goes down in Vegas. All right.
Let's do it. Just want to let you know, my attitude is either going to be really good or really bad, depending on how this game goes. So I don't know what Blake you're going to get, but I greatly appreciate y'all having us, and I look forward to being back.
All right, Blake Ruffino with us today on Bleav in Big Ten. And that's going to do it for us here on the Valley Sports edition here of Bleav in Big Ten. Appreciate all you guys joining us. We'll have some more content for you coming up later this week. Thanks a bunch. All right, friends, continuing Bleav in Big Ten in this game week episode. Rhett Lewis back here with you as we try to go through the rest of the games. Obviously went heavy on USC and LSU. It is the biggest game in the Big Ten this week and thought we'd give that some of its just due. Now, we got games kicking off Thursday evening, and we'll start with those going chronological order, go a little bit longer on some of the teams that we didn't hit in our summer series previews. So we're going to start here with the first game of the Big Ten slate here in this opening week of college football. Howard and Rutgers, obviously mismatch on paper, a lot of expectation with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights this year. Look, they're going to win this game against Howard, and here's how they do it. 2 words, Kyle Monangai. One of 9 returning players on this Scarlet Knights offense. He put together the best season by a Scarlet Knights running back since Ray Rice. Okay, first Rutgers player to eclipse 1,000 yards since 2012. Led the Big Ten in rushing yards, yards after contact, broken tackles, and missed tackles forced. Well, let's go. Load up Kyle Monangai. Now, that's kind of what Kirk Ciarrocca and the offensive coordinator at Rutgers and what Greg Schiano want to do. It's also what they had to do last year. They had 0 pass game, 0. Now, does Ethan Kaliakmanis, who transfers to Rutgers from Minnesota, rekindles his connection with Kirk Ciarrocca? They were together in their time there in the Twin Cities. And so does Ethan Kaliakmanis, that's our biggest question here, provide enough in the pass game to keep defenses guessing when they have to? Look, this is a team, like we talked about Iowa as an inept offense last year, but if you want to talk about passing yards per game, Rutgers was right there with Iowa in terms of, struggles in the pass game. In fact, they were about 8 yards lower than Iowa, or 8 yards higher, rather, in terms of pass yards per game. They had 145. Iowa was 137. And then the next teams, in terms of lowest pass yards per game outage, were the service academies. And we know what they like to do in running the football and running the option. They also had the lowest completion percentage of any non-service academy FBS team last year. They completed less than 50% of their passes. That's not winning football, no matter how you cut it, no matter how you want to turn, no matter how much you want to run the ball. So biggest questions in the pass game, but feed Kyle Monangai certainly early on here in games where you should dominate up front. Defensively, this should be another good experienced team, but they will be without linebacker Muhammad Toure. Tore his ACL towards the end of fall camp, and he was the team leader in tackles for loss last year. So we'll see how they accommodate that loss. But Rutgers will roll against Howard. North Carolina, Minnesota, next up chronologically. They'll kick 8 o'clock Eastern time. Look, I think the big question for Minnesota right now is Darius Taylor healthy, and can he stay healthy? Reportedly sustained an injury late in fall camp. The Detroit native, finished second among FBS true freshmen in rushing yards, only played 6 games last year. And again, missed the other 6 because of injury. But in the 6 that he played, had a yard under 800 yards rushing, led the nation with 133.2 rushing yards per game. Against North Carolina last year, as they opened the season, Taylor went for 138 yards on the ground, with 88 of those coming after contact. So that's something to watch here. Darius Taylor, when healthy, is an absolute stud and will be one of the best running backs in the Big Ten this year. But the health is the question. Daniel Jackson, top wide receiver, also reportedly a little bit limited with an injury. So we'll see how that factors in. And then if Taylor's out, if Jackson is, less than 100%, enter Max Brosmer with a lot of weight on his shoulders in his first season of FBS football after coming in from New Hampshire, where he was the FCS leader in passing yards per game last year at just over 313. So look, he is judicious with the football, threw just 5 interceptions and 29 touchdowns last year, was in the running for the Walter Payton Award given to the best FCS player. So he's got talent on that level. Now, does it translate? Obviously a big question there. He is kind of a pocket passer here. He does excel in the middle of the field, where Gophers quarterbacks last year really had trouble. So we'll see where that ends up. Look, and then this defense is a veteran defense. I don't think they performed up to their potential a year ago, but with guys like Jod Joyner coming back, who led the team in sacks with 7.5 and pressures with 72 since 2022. Okay, he's third in the Big Ten in pressures over the last 2 years, behind only first-round pick Jerzon Newton, rookie for the Washington Commanders this year, and the stud linebacker for the Indiana Hoosiers the last 2 years, Aaron Casey. So keep an eye on Ja Joyner in that game. I think that's a tight one. A little worried about you, Minnesota, in this one. I think right now I'll give the edge to UNC. Let's move to the third Thursday night game. That is a 9:00 Eastern time kick from Champaign. Eastern Illinois and Illinois, the Lynn State matchup here. Look, I think when you look at Illinois, the offense was overall improved last year. They averaged nearly 400 yards a game, mostly because of the increase in pass game production. Only Penn State and Ohio State, in fact, averaged more offensive production per game last year than Barry Lunney's offense for Brett Bielema at Illinois. But they also turned the ball over at a rate that they cannot afford to, and that was a big reason why this team did not rise to the level of expectation that they had set for themselves the year before. So 13 interceptions, turned it over 26 times in total. That cannot happen. Also allowed a league high 34 sacks. Sacks and turnovers, big reason why this higher powered Illinois offense did not deliver in the win-loss column. 2023 kind of kept a trend going, though, in terms of run game production going down. Obviously, you lose Chase Brown, you lose a lot of production. They weren't able to keep that up on a consistent basis last year. But if Caden Fagan, who is the 6'3", 250-pound freshman phenom a year ago, and maybe gotten the rock earlier in the season, he didn't really take off until the second month of the season, and even then got hurt and was limited down the stretch. But he was in line for a massive year, is in line for a massive year this year. We're talking about a guy that had, almost 400 yards rushing in very limited action last year, but he will be a force to be reckoned with. So we will see if Caden Fagan in Illinois, and then they obviously added a bunch to the transfer portal. On defense, I expect Brett Bielema's unit to be disciplined and to create some big plays. I think Illinois rolls in this game against Eastern Illinois. Next one up is the first one on Friday, Florida Atlantic and Michigan State debut for Jonathan Smith and for quarterback Aiden Childs. Obviously, both of them were together at Oregon State. They come together to East Lansing to try to rekindle some explosive offense there for the Spartans. Look, Michigan State, in terms of fewest points per game by FBS teams last year, Michigan State was not far behind Iowa in terms of ineptitude on offense. 15.9 points per game last year for Michigan State. It was bad. Their fewest in the season since 1991. Enter Aiden Childs, who was one of the most highly touted quarterbacks coming out of high school. Obviously went to Oregon State and then was a top 10 acquisition in the transfer portal, depending on what services you use in terms of ranking. But he is a stud, and it's now going to be his ball from the get-go. He played in 9 games last year through, accumulated nearly 400 total yards and scored 7 touchdowns, just enough to create some massive expectations, some massive intrigue as he now transfers from Oregon State into Michigan State. They're rejoining Jonathan Smith. So really excited to see what Aiden Childs does for the Spartans. Montorie Foster will be one of his big targets. They also, Aiden Childs comes in from Oregon State with a couple of his former teammates. Jack Velling at tight end, at 8 touchdowns, tied for the most of any FBS tight end last year. He'll be a target. And then Tanner Miller, played in 40 career games along the offensive line, will help a depleted Michigan State offensive line kind of come together in that sense. So excited to see what this Michigan State offense does against FAU. I do think that they will, especially with Aiden Childs and his ability to create plays, win that matchup. Let's move to Western Michigan and Wisconsin. Look, this to me is, does this game signal the end of the square peg round hole era of this early piece of Luke Fickell's tenure as the head coach at Wisconsin and Phil Longo's tenure as the offensive coordinator? Major departure in terms of personality, scheme, with what we're used to in terms of, Wisconsin, big physical, run the ball, grind it out type of offense, traditionally. But Phil Longo comes in with the air raid, kind of spread it out a little bit. They didn't have the personnel for it last year, in my opinion. I think they are more aligned with that philosophy this year. Obviously, stud Will Pauling, wide receiver, and you get Tyler Van Dyke coming in at quarterback. And does he help, kind of nurture that change in philosophy? for this Wisconsin team. So that's obviously going to be something to follow here in this matchup against Western Michigan. One, I do think that they win. They're just better matched, certainly up front on both sides of the ball, and with some better skill out there. Pauling, Hunter Wohler, absolute stud on defense. So I think Wisconsin finds a way to get this thing done. Biggest game on Saturday in the Big Ten in terms of competitive matchups, I do Bleav will come in the big noon kickoff on Fox, Penn State and West Virginia from Morgantown. Lot going on there. Obviously, Pat McAfee show's there. Big noon is there. This is a big-time matchup for James Franklin in a season in which he is expected to bring this team to the college football playoff. We know what they can do on the ground. Kate Turnell and Nick Singleton. What does Drew Aller do through the air? How much did Julian Fleming, the transfer addition from Ohio State, help push the ball down the field a little bit more than we saw? And then obviously Andy Kotelnicki as the offensive coordinator. What does this offense really look like? How much more explosive does it get now? Are some of the biggest questions surrounding this team. Tom Allen comes in as the defensive coordinator. I think he gets this defense creating havoc. Watch out for that bull position, the Husky position, which is kind of that nickel corner. The bull is, kind of that edge rusher that can get after the passer. Abdul Carter going to be one of those guys this year. They're going to move him around a la Micah Parsons. So excited to see what that Penn State defense does against an underrated quarterback, in my opinion, in Garrett Green for West Virginia. For Iowa, Cade McNamara does get the start at quarterback despite a less than enthusiastic reaction to his performance in fall camp and in scrimmages. New offensive coordinator, but is it the same methodical, grinded out type of, uninspiring offense in Iowa City this year? I think there are some differences. I think it will be a little bit easier on the eyes. How much? I don't know, but certainly enough for Iowa to beat Illinois State in their season opener as we work through this Saturday slate. So Iowa certainly gets it done with defense and with special teams, if not with an improved offense this year. Luke Lachey, watch out for him, the tight end, will be one of the best tight ends in all of college football this year. UConn and Maryland. A lot of new for Maryland on offense. Obviously, replacing Talia Tagovailoa, MJ Morris, Billy Edwards. Where do we go with the quarterback spot? What does that look like? Roman Hemby, though, one of the better running backs in this conference, capable of some explosive offense. Certainly excited to see what he can do for this team. I think Maryland, in an old ACC or in an old, kind of geographical rivalry there, rather, with Maryland and UConn. I think the Randy Edsall Bowl maybe is what we call this, but Maryland does roll in this game. I think they get this win as they try to back up what was a really good year for Mike Locksley in College Park this past year. There's definitely been some transfer turnover there at Maryland, but Mike is one of the best head coaches, I think, that doesn't get a lot of credit for his acumen, kind of overall overseeing this program from a 30,000 foot view. One of the best recruiters, one of the best offensive coaches, certainly. I think he does a nice job there for sure at Maryland. I think they will find their way pretty quickly here this season. All right, that brings us to Purdue and Indiana State. Second year for Ryan Walters leading that program there in West Lafayette. They're going to win this game. Indiana State just doesn't match up with what Purdue has from a skill position standpoint, and most notably up front, where Purdue, I think, will be even better this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball than they were in years past. Look, this to me comes down with Hudson Card being one of the better quarterbacks that doesn't get enough publicity in the Big Ten Conference. I think he's a top 5 quarterback in this conference. I think he's that good. And they brought in some receivers through the transfer portal this year to help. Graham Harrell, year 2 together with Hudson Card, with Ryan Walters. I think there's a nice rhythm there. Look, Tyrone Tracy's gone. I think that's a big loss, but I think Purdue certainly finds a way to score points this year. And now in year 2, understanding what Ryan Walters wants to do with this defense, Dylan Thieneman is an absolute game wrecker, playmaker from the safety spot. I think we see major improvements on the defensive side of the ball, where Ryan Walters kind of has, pulling, all the strings there as a defensive-minded head coach. So I like Purdue to roll in that game against Indiana State. Look, Ohio State's going to win. Only question is by how much against Akron. I mean, we're talking about a nearly, 50-point favorite, kind of line here for Ohio State. They're going to roll, and it's a matter of how long are they going to leave Will Howard in. How much are we going to see of Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson in this game? How much are we going to see of Emeka Ibuka, Jeremiah Smith? Like so much of that talent on offense is what we're going to want to see. But I don't imagine we're going to see a lot of it in the second half. This game is going to be a blowout from the jump, most likely. Look, Caleb Downs on defense, something I really want to see as well. So let's not forget that part of the equation. Jim Knowles back running that defense after some major improvements a year ago on the defensive side of the ball for Ohio State. National championship contender. Be that in week one, right? Showcase your dominance. Show us what to look forward to for the rest of the season. I think that offensive line led by Justin Fry, who is one of the better offensive line coaches in the country, I think is going to be something to watch as well. A lot of talent up there and guys that have been in that program for a little while that have continued to develop. So excited to watch Ohio State. Again, going to be an explosive one-sided game in Columbus. That a 3:30 Eastern time kick on CBS as they begin their full slate of Big Ten coverage this year. Florida International and Indiana. A lot of hype, a lot of excitement with Indiana. I think it's warranted. I think Curt Cignetti has a winning formula. I think he's got great assistant coaches at that coordinator level. Brian Haynes running the defense, Mike Shanahan, Tino Sinceri running the offense, Grant Kane running the special teams. They've been with Curt Cignetti for a long time. They know what he wants. They know what he expects. And Curtis Rourke running the offense for the quarterback spot, transfer in from Ohio. This is a transfer team right now. They are a veteran team, a lot of new faces, a lot of them coming from James Madison, though. So I think that helps smooth out the edges that sometimes you might see when you get a team with a ton of transfers, because obviously with Cignetti and this coaching staff coming from JMU, they know what to expect from these players. And these players have kind of helped become the mouthpiece to spread, the Cignetti gospel throughout this team. And I think you're going to see a tough team. I think you're going to see an explosive offense. I think you see a defense that causes havoc in the backfield, stops the run, creates turnovers. Now, look, FIU's got a mobile quarterback that can cause some trouble when he gets outside the pocket. That'll be something that they got to watch. But I think Indiana wins this game in a big way in the home opener, kicking off the Curt Cignetti era there in Bloomington. UTEP and Nebraska. Look, it's all about Dylan Raiola, the true freshman quarterback, going to get the start here. How does he look? How comfortable does he look? How does he command the offense, command the respect of the teammates, veteran teammates that he's going to be playing with, as a true freshman? And how much of the Mahomes type stuff do we see? Obviously, that's a big influence in his game. He is a big fan there. Excited to see them. But I think regardless, Nebraska starts off year 2 under Matt Rule, getting a win over UTEP. Okay, go rapid fire here because we've talked about these teams in our previews. Let's go, Idaho, Oregon. I'm going to be in Eugene for this game, calling the game for Big Ten Network. Excited for that. We'll have a big-time recap for you coming up next week off our recap episodes here on Bleav in Big Ten. But look, Dylan Gabriel, the Tez Johnson, and Ferguson, the tight end, and Jordan James, the running back, they are going to score so many points in this game. It's just going to be an absolute just assault that Idaho is going to have to withstand. They are a good FCS team, but this is a national title contender at Oregon. Defensive side of the ball, Jordan Birch coming off the edge. I think Jabbar Muhammad at corner transfers in from Washington, is one of the very best in the country. And Jeff Bassa, physical, intelligent, football IQ, very high, leader at that linebacker spot, one of the best linebackers in the country. They are going to absolutely roll in this game against Idaho. And I can't wait to watch how explosive the offense is and how dominant and physical the defense is. Don't let the speed fool you. Physicality, major emphasis for Oregon this year. Michigan and Fresno State. Look, Fresno State's not one to just roll over. And with Michigan, breaking in a new quarterback, regardless of who that is, I think that's something to really watch here. But I think Michigan with the run game and Donovan Edwards, with a veteran defense up front, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, watch out. Will Johnson in the secondary, man. Defensively, Fresno State's going to be in trouble. Offensively, if they can stop the run or limit the explosive runs, maybe force a quarterback into turning over the football a little bit. They keep this thing close, but ultimately Michigan wins and probably win by multiple scores. UCLA and Hawaii, first game of the Deshaun Foster era, is something to watch here. Look, Chase Garbers, comes in running this offense. It's his show from the get-go. He was kind of yo-yoed around in that lineup last year, quarterback. I think he picks up where he left off with the momentum he had in the bowl game last year for UCLA. I think UCLA rocks and rolls on the road against Hawaii. And we'll finish it up. Weber State and Washington. This is a 8 p.m. Pacific time kickoff. All right, this is Big Ten after dark, baby. First game of the Jed Fish era. They're in Seattle. Look, I think Will Rogers at quarterback, a veteran presence there is going to help smooth this transition after they're replacing so many guys on offense and defense, so many starters from that national title national champion runner-up team from a year ago with Kalen DeBoer. I think Rogers helps steady the ship here a little bit early on. They get the dub easily against Weber State, but what happens beyond that is something to follow with Washington. So there you go. We hit all 18 games, all 18 Big Ten teams. Appreciate you guys being with us on this episode of Bleav in Big Ten. Back with you with our first preview or first review episode, our recap episode coming up next week right here. Be sure to leave us comments on the Bleav YouTube page. Check out our Big Ten playlist on the Bleav Network YouTube page. Leave us some of those comments and questions. You'll check us out and we'll find you in the comments as well. Leave us a like, a review, a subscription. We sure do appreciate all that. It allows us to do more for you here on Bleav in Big Ten. I'm Rhett Lewis. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll catch you next week. Enjoy the games, everybody.